Crimson Plague. Part 1, The Rotting Crown. I, the Queen's Vision. The throne room reeked of copper, and something else, something that had no name in the living world. Queen Morveren of Cairnthorne sat rigid upon her seat of blackthorn and bone, her pale fingers gripping armrests carved from the ribcage of a beast whose species had died 1,000 years prior. Her crown, wrought from silver and twisted iron, seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour, as though it was slowly sinking into her skull. She had not slept in 9 days. The dreams had come first, whispers that turned to screams, visions of crimson waters rising from the earth's seams, forests that wept tears of blood. Then came the fever. Then came the knowledge that none of it was truly a dream at all. Your Majesty, her chamberlain, 𝕮𝖃𝖌𝖚, entered with careful steps. His face was the color of ash, which meant he too had heard the reports from the borderlands. The ravens have returned. Morveren did not look at him. Her eyes remained fixed upon a point in the middle distance that existed only in her mind, a place where the veil between worlds had grown thin as parchment. "How many dead?" she asked. 17 villages, 𝕮𝖃𝖌𝖚 whispered. "The survivors speak only of your Majesty. They speak only of madness. Children who tore at their own flesh. Mothers who drank the blood from the stones. A farmer who gouged out his own eyes and wore them as a crown." The Queen's fingers twitched. A small motion, but it caused the bones of the throne to creak in protest. Shadows in the corners of the chamber seemed to deepen, as though they were listening. "The healers?" she asked. "Dead, all of them. The sickness, it changes them, your Majesty. It changes them into something else. The last healer, Morogh of Strathmore, she walked into the standing stones near Donnchadh. They found her 3 days later, but she was not entirely there anymore, speaking in tongues that predated language itself. Morveren rose slowly from her throne. When she moved, there was something not quite right about the motion, as though her limbs were answering commands from somewhere other than her own mind. The courtiers nearest to her took a collective step backward. "Summon the knights," she said, "both the white and the black, and send word into the deep forests. We have need of counsel from those who dwell outside the kingdom's law." 𝕮𝖃𝖌𝖚 bowed so deeply, his forehead nearly touched the marble floor. "At once, your Majesty." As he turned to leave, Morveren called out, "And 𝕮𝖃𝖌𝖚, the sickness, did you feel it? When the reports came, did you feel something stirring in your blood?" He froze. When he turned back, his eyes were wide with a terror that transcended mere physical fear. "How did you? I did not ask if you understood what you were feeling. I asked if you felt it." 𝕮𝖃𝖌𝖚's hands had begun to tremble. "Yes, your Majesty, like something trying to crawl up through my bones." Morveren nodded slowly. "Good. Then you understand that we are no longer governing a kingdom. We are governing the edge of an abyss, and something is climbing up from the bottom. Roman 2, the road to Cairnthorne. Sir Donnchadh of the White Order rode through the blighted lands with his squire, a boy named Callum Mackenzie, who had not yet seen 16 winters. Behind them, the landscape told a story written in rotting flesh and bone. The crops had failed 3 months prior, but not due to poor weather or failing soil. Something had poisoned the earth itself. Where wheat and barley had once grown, there now grew twisted things that resembled neither plant nor fungus, things with a faint bioluminescence that cast a sickly glow in the twilight hours. The cattle had stopped dying and started changing. The last one, Donnchadh, had seen wore the expression of human understanding in a bovine face, and its eyes wept what appeared to be tears of liquid silver. Sir Donnchadh was tall, with the kind of handsomeness that had been weathered by too many years of witnessing injustice. His armor was gleaming white, polished so meticulously that it seemed to carry its own light even when the sun had fled behind the clouds. The emblem of his order, a sword piercing a heart beneath a star, was worked in silver thread upon his cloak. For 20 years, he had ridden in service of the light, believing in the fundamental goodness of creation, in the power of righteousness to cut through darkness. That belief had been bleeding out of him slowly, like a wound that would not close. "Sir," Callum called out nervously, "what if we encounter one of the afflicted?" Donnchadh did not answer immediately. He was thinking of a woman he had seen in the last village, 𝕮𝖆, or what remained of it. She had been tied to a post in the town square, and her skin had been slewing off in great strips to reveal something underneath that was not quite flesh. When she saw him, she had smiled with teeth that had rotted to black stumps, and she had spoken in a voice like wind through a carrion pit. "Your light will not save you, knight. It will only show us where to find you in the dark." Before he could respond, the other villagers, the ones who were still somewhat human, had begun beating her with rocks. They did not kill her. That was the worst part. They simply beat her until she could no longer speak, and then they tied her there to wait for either death or transformation, whichever came first. "If we encounter one of the afflicted," Donnchadh said finally, "we will do what knights are sworn to do." "And what is that, sir?" "I am no longer entirely certain, Callum." They rode in silence for a time, the sound of their horses, hooves the only conversation between them. Around them, the forest had begun to change. The trees were still trees, more or less, but they grew in configurations that the natural world would not have permitted. Trunks spiraled upward in impossible helixes. Branches wove together to form shapes that suggested anatomical structures, ribs, spines, tangled neural pathways. The leaves had taken on hues that no autumn could produce. A sickly violet, a blue so deep it seemed to reflect light from within. And everywhere the watching. Donnchadh had developed a sense for it over the years, the feeling of being observed by things that did not mean well. The forest was watching. Every shadow was an eye. Every rustling leaf was the turning of a head. It was not natural paranoia born of travel through dangerous lands. It was something else, something that had weight and presence. Sir Donnchadh. Callum suddenly pulled his horse to a stop. Ahead of them, in the middle of the forest path, stood a figure that seemed to exist slightly out of alignment with the world around it. She was tall, impossibly tall, and her skin had the quality of moonlight on still water. She wore a dress of woven thistle and shadow, and her hair moved as though it were underwater, though there was no breeze. Her face was beautiful in the way that certain fractures in stone can be beautiful, a beauty composed entirely of wrongness. She smiled, and her teeth were pointed like a fox. "Well met, Sir Knight," she said, and her voice was the voice of wind through autumn leaves. "I am Queen Morveren of the Blackthorn Court, and I bring word from the deep places." Donnchadh's hand had moved to his sword, but he did not draw it. He had learned long ago that there were some battles that could not be won with steel. "Speak," he said. "Your queen has called, and I come bearing counsel. The plague that spreads through the kingdom is not a natural sickness. It is a door, and something is pushing through from the other side. The afflicted are not dying, they are being hollowed out and filled with something else. Something old and hungry that remembers when this land was bare stone, and there were no kingdoms here, no knights, no queens." "What does the queen intend?" Donnchadh asked. "That is not my knowledge to hold," Siobhan said. "But I can tell you this. She will not survive what is coming. None of the living will, unless the door is sealed. And sealing it will require a sacrifice of a kind that most mortals lack the courage to comprehend." The creature for Donnchadh was now certain that whatever she was, it was not human, began to fade, becoming translucent as morning mist. "Ride swiftly, knight. The Black Knight approaches from the other direction, and his intentions are considerably less clear than yours. When the three of you stand before the Queen, remember this: light and darkness are only two facets of a much larger truth. The third part is silence, and it is approaching from below." Then she was gone, leaving only the faint smell of rot beneath honeysuckle. Callum's horse had begun to panic, rearing and dancing sideways. Donnchadh placed a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. "We ride faster now," he said quietly. Roman 3, the Black Knight's Road. Sir Morogh of Strathmore had been born in shadow, and shadow seemed to follow him with a kind of terrible loyalty. Unlike the White Knight, whose armor gleamed with meticulous care, Morogh's armor was black, truly black, the kind of black that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. There were stories about how it had been forged. Some said it had been quenched in the blood of a king's bastard. Others claimed the metal had been mined from a place where no sunlight had ever touched, where the earth's darkness still retained the memory of the beginning of time. He rode alone because others could not long tolerate his presence. Animals grew nervous around him. Plants seemed to lean away. Even his own horse, a creature named Morveren that was nearly as strange as its master, moved with the gait of something carrying an unbearable weight. Morogh did not fight for the light. He had seen what the light did, how it burned away complexity, reduced the world to binary choices, simple and stupid, and ultimately cruel. He fought, if he could be said to fight at all, for what he called the truth beneath the throne, a kind of absolute perspective that acknowledged that all kingdoms were built on bones, all thrones stood upon corpses, and all order was simply a more refined form of chaos. The plague pleased him. He had watched it spread with something approaching what might have been called joy. If joy was a concept that could apply to one as fundamentally empty as Morogh had become. Here, finally, was something that would strip away the pretense. Here was something that would show the kingdom the true face of creation, mad, hungry, beautiful in its absolute indifference to human suffering. He had been riding toward Cairnthorne for 6 days when he encountered them. The imps. They were not like the stories told of imps in the drinking halls of common folk. They were not cute or funny. They were small, no more than 2 feet tall, but their smallness only made them more terrible, because it meant you could see every detail of their anatomies. Their skin appeared to be chitin over shifting muscle. Their eyes were compound, fractal things that seemed to contain the pattern of the entire universe, compressed down to an impossible fineness. Their fingers had too many joints, and their mouths, when they opened, revealed teeth arranged in geometric patterns that hurt to look at. There were 3 of them, crouched in the branches of a dead oak, and when they saw Morogh, they began to laugh. The sound was not laughter as mortals understood it. It was a frequency that existed at the edge of hearing, something that made the teeth ache and the bones feel suddenly fragile. Morogh found that he was smiling in response. "Dark brother," one of them said, and its voice was like the grinding of stone. "You ride to the throne room. You carry news, yes, word from the in-between places. I carry whatever I will carry when I arrive," Morogh replied. "Are you the servants of the plague, or merely its audience?" The imp's laughter intensified until Morogh's vision began to blur at the edges. "We are the plague's children," the middle one said. "Born from it, yes, fed by the screaming. We tell you a secret, dark brother, the queen already knows. She has always known. The crown she wears, it was made from the bones of the first thing that came through the door. She opened it herself long ago, and now it opens wider. Soon the kingdom will be filled with what waits on the other side. Soon there will be no more distinction between the mad and the sane. For the world itself will be mad, and all will be at peace in that madness." "Does she seek to prevent this?" Morogh asked. "No, dark brother. She seeks to become it. She seeks to be the first of the new thing, the queen before the transformation. And that is why you ride toward her." Then the imps faded, not disappearing, but becoming so perfectly still that they became indistinguishable from the wood itself. Morogh sat motionless on his horse for several minutes, processing this information, letting it settle into the architecture of his being like a stone dropping through deep water. He had come to Cairnthorne, expecting to watch the kingdom's fall. But perhaps he thought with something that might have been satisfaction. The fall would be far more interesting than he had anticipated. Roman 4, the Cathedral of the Damned, in a place that was technically within the kingdom, but functionally outside of it, in the deep heart of the Blackwood Forest, where the trees were old enough to remember ice ages, there stood a cathedral made of bone and blackthorn. This was the place where the other creatures of the realm went to worship, not God, for they had their own gods, or perhaps more accurately, they had no God and had learned to be grateful for that fact. Here came the fairies who had grown tired of blessing mortals, fairies with wings like fragments of obsidian and smiles that suggested they had seen behind the veil between worlds and found something amusing there. Here came the creatures that had no names, or had names that hurt to pronounce. Here came anything that was beautiful in a way that threatened to break the mind. The priestess of this place was named 𝕮𝖗𝖘𝖔𝖓, and she was perhaps the last purely sane creature in the kingdom. She knelt before an altar that was not quite an altar, made her devotions to a god that was not quite a god, and listened to the reports that came in from her far-flung congregation of beings. The plague was spreading faster now, not just as a sickness, but as a contagion of consciousness. More creatures were choosing to succumb to it, stepping over the threshold from sanity into that strange new rapture that waited on the other side. Priestess, a voice spoke from the shadows, the voice of one of the fairies, sharp and bright as breaking glass. The queen's ravens have been seen. She gathers her knights. She prepares for something. Iseult rose to her feet. She was a woman of middle years, with silver threaded through her black hair, and eyes that had been touched by something that most mortals would go mad from witnessing. Unlike many of the priestesses who served the deeper powers, she had not sacrificed her beauty for knowledge. She had kept both, and it made her seem like something caught between worlds, not quite mortal, but not quite otherworldly either. The queen seeks to preserve the kingdom, Iseult said. She does not understand that preservation is no longer possible. The door is open. What comes through will not be halted by mortal will or mortal steel. We must accept this. We must adapt, or we will be burned away by what emerges. And is that not death? Asked another creature, this one with too many eyes, and a mouth that seemed to exist on several planes simultaneously. Is adaptation not another form of death? Yes, Iseult said simply. It is, but it is also rebirth, and that is something. She moved toward a pool of dark water that occupied the center of the cathedral's nave. In its depths, things moved, things that had never been born in any conventional sense, that had always existed in the spaces between moments. They formed patterns in the water, and Iseult read those patterns the way a scholar reads text. What she saw made her close her eyes for a moment. The three of them will meet soon, she said at last. The white knight who has begun to doubt his light, the black knight who has already embraced the darkness, and the queen who is becoming something other than human. From their meeting will come a reckoning. And from that reckoning will come either the salvation of the kingdom or its transformation into something we cannot yet imagine. Which do you hope for? Asked the many-eyed thing. Iseult smiled, and there was something terrible in that smile, not because it was cruel, but because it suggested that she had seen some cosmic joke that mortals would never be allowed to understand. I hope for what is true, she said, and I will worship whatever truth emerges from the darkness. The arrival. Sir Donnchadh and his squire reached the gates of Cairnthorne Castle as the sun was setting, casting the white stone in shades of amber and violet. The city that lay beneath the castle walls was quiet in a way that cities should never be quiet. Quiet cities meant plague. Quiet cities meant that the people had been reduced to something that no longer needed to speak. He rode through streets where the buildings seemed to have been decorated with something that resembled ivy, but moved on its own, with a pulse like a heartbeat. He saw creatures in windows that might have been human, or might have been the things that human shapes became when they were infected with the plague. Some of them smiled at him as he passed. Others simply stared with eyes that contained too many colors. At the castle gates, 𝕻𝖾𝖆 was waiting, and the chamberlain's expression suggested he had not slept in far longer than 9 days. There were dark things moving beneath his skin, visible when the light caught him at certain angles. Sir Donnchadh, he said, and his voice came from a throat that seemed simultaneously his own and something much older. The Queen awaits, and you are not the first to arrive. The Black Knight, Donnchadh asked. He sits in the antechamber. He has said nothing since his arrival an hour ago. But the shadows in that room are deeper than they should be, and I confess I have not dared to enter since he took his seat. They climbed the spiral stairs that led to the throne room, Callum following behind, his young face pale and drawn. The castle's interior seemed to be slowly transforming. Tapestries showed scenes that had not been woven into them. Portraits displayed faces that shifted and changed when you weren't looking directly at them. And the very walls seemed to sweat a kind of luminescent moisture that smelled of copper and burning flowers. At the door to the throne room, Donnchadh paused. Whatever happens in there, he said quietly to Callum, remember that what you see and hear might not be what it appears to be. The mind is a fragile thing, and it can be deceived in ways that are very real. Is that supposed to comfort me, sir? The boy asked. No, Donnchadh replied. I suspect very little will be able to comfort us after today. He pushed open the doors. The throne room had not changed, and yet everything about it had changed. Queen Morveren still sat upon her throne, still wore her crown of twisted iron and silver. But there was an insubstantiality to her now, as though she was slowly becoming translucent, fading from the world of the living into some other realm. And Sir Morogh of Strathmore sat upon a chair that had not been there before, his black armor absorbing what little light remained in the chamber. When Morveren spoke, Her voice seemed to come from very far away, echoing as though it traveled through countless corridors and chambers before reaching the ears of those who listened. At last, she said, the three visions made flesh, the light, the darkness, and the space between them. You have all come because you sensed that something fundamental has shifted, that the kingdom stands at the precipice of a great change. Your Majesty, Donnchadh said, and he knelt, though it took him a moment to realize that he had done so. His body had made the decision without consulting his mind. The plague spreads. The people are changed into something terrible. We have come to aid you in stopping this corruption. The queen rose from her throne. When she did, her form rippled slightly, as though she existed on multiple planes simultaneously. Stop it, she laughed, and the sound was the sound of breaking glass and drowning children. Oh, noble knight, you have come to stop it, but stopping it has never been possible. It cannot be stopped because it is not a plague at all. It is the answer. The answer to what? Morogh asked, and his voice was calm and measured, the voice of one who was not surprised by anything. To the fundamental horror of existence, Morveren replied. To the terror of consciousness trapped in a world that follows rules it never agreed to. The plague is mercy. It is transformation. It is the kingdom's awakening. And then, as Donnchadh watched in horror, the queen began to change.